Hi. Just that here. Yeah. There is a proverb. I forget exactly where it's found. It goes something like this. It's no good. It's no good, says the buyer, and then he goes off and boasts about his purchase. To me, the meaning of the proverb goes something like this. And you have to kind of imagine a bartering situation where buyers would go into the marketplace and would go to a potential seller, see something that they're selling, and would engage in a negotiation to try and buy the product that they want to buy. And it starts off with the buyer claiming that the product is not in pristine condition. He says it's no good. It's no good. But in the end, he ends up buying the product, which means that obviously, if he thought it was really no good, he was fine with buying something that was no good. But I think it speaks more to the fact that he really just didn't want to pay full price for it. And so therefore he beat the price down in the barter by claiming that the product itself was defective. But the fact that he bought it, I guess, proved that he really wanted it. That sort of has to do with, I guess, what I want to talk about. But then again, maybe it does. Maybe it was just a nice little story to start off with. But I wanted to talk about differing weights and measures that would be used by somebody who is buying and selling. That in Jewish law or in the Torah, it actually forbids the use of differing weights and measures. How that would work is that when a buyer would buy something, he would use a set of weights to measure out on a scale a certain weight of something that he's buying. But when he goes to sell that item, he uses a different set of weights so that he can profit off of the difference between the two weights. Now, the Torah is not opposed to making a profit. I believe I heard the number 1/6 was seen as a reasonable profit on something that could be charged, but I don't know where that comes from. But I did hear it somewhere along the way, and so I'm going to put up this disclaimer. I don't know that is the proper number, but I heard it. But the point is really not whether it's 1/6 or more or less. It's that the idea of making a profit off a transaction is not considered a bad thing. But using dishonest scales is a bad thing and is absolutely forbidden. And I think for understandable reasons why that would be, that if you are using what we would call dishonest weights, you're deceiving either the buyer or the seller, or perhaps even both. So deception is a bad thing because it leads people to believe things about what they are buying or what they are judging, what they are assessing, that is incorrect. Or they might be using a set of measures in a transaction that if they had been using the proper measure or a proper way of judging the value of the product, either in its weight or in the value of the product in terms of whether it's actually good or bad, relatively speaking. But that when you know the truth, then answer, or then you can make better decisions. Well, this issue of weights and measures also has an effect in many other areas. In fact, the more that I thought about this idea of differing weights and measures, this idea of having a way of judging either something that we own or something that we wish to sell versus something that we wish to buy or something that somebody else has that they are wishing to sell, that we can have, I guess we can make judgments about these two things, the things that are ours and the things that are theirs, using different measures, different weights. Let me give you an example. And I'm going to leave this in generalities, and sometimes that's problematic, but sometime back, I was reading a comment by a Jew. This was on a Jewish website that I know that Jews and Noahides frequent. And it was about the ongoing debate with Christians, because many Noahides came out of Christianity and embraced Judaism, but not to the point of conversion, but wish to observe the 7 Noahide laws. And so it is not unusual to find Noahides being involved in these discussions more so than Jews are, because, well, I guess it's kind of, when you leave something, sometimes in the process of leaving, you end up engaged in conversations, because on your way out, in my case, on my way out of Christianity, I did have questions, and I was asking those questions that I was thinking in my head. I was asking those questions to other Christians around me, which often led to debates. It wasn't because I was trying to prove them wrong. I was just trying to deal with my own questions. And in so doing, debating these ideas becomes a way of, it just becomes part of the story. You're leaving what you used to believe and you're embracing something else. And the people that you were familiar with at that time, they have concerns, obviously, with your exit to, your exit from Christianity. And often they're not even entertaining the questions that you're entertaining. And therefore, when they're listening to your questions, they're really not actually engaged in the thinking process the way you are. For them, they've kind of accepted that they're using they're using a weight in assessing their own belief that is different from the one that you're now using. Usually you're more skeptical. Usually you're more questioning, and you're willing to question authority, and that makes them uncomfortable. And so anyway, I just, and so that's one way of how we use different measures and weights. But what the point, I guess, that I was getting to is that on this website, as often is the case when you get into this debate over Christianity versus Judaism or Christianity versus the Noahide laws, that you can sometimes create an argument in your mind against Christianity that you think is reasonable. But if you were to apply or to use the same measure of criticism to, say, Judaism or the Noahide laws, you would end up in the same kind of problem. For example, somebody had made a comment regarding the authenticity or the, can we really trust the New Testament? Can we really look at the New Testament as a divinely inspired document? Obviously, Jews would look at the Tanakh, the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, the Old Testament, if you will. They would look at that and they would say that this document is inspired, but we don't believe that the New Testament is inspired. The Christian believes that the New Testament is also inspired. And so part of the way that you end up distinguishing the two camps is you attack their scriptures. And you say of the Christian scriptures, the Jews say of the Christian scriptures, we don't believe that that's inspired. And one of the things that was brought up was actually about whether it was reasonable to believe in the miracles. I've heard this one used actually several times, this idea of like somehow the miracles that we used to believe as Christians that Jesus performed, now we are suspecting there's something wrong with that, all of those miracles. Is it really reasonable to believe that that it was necessary for God to come down and do all these miracles in order to substantiate Jesus' authority or Jesus' divinity or what have you? And the other part of the argument was about the some of the higher criticisms of liberal scholarship about the New Testament documents themselves that would call into question whether or not we could really trust that these documents were inspired or that their origins were actually go back into the first generation of disciples who followed Jesus. And so somebody was actually raising this question or raising these questions on this site because they were engaged in this debate with a Christian. And it occurred to me at that point in time, because obviously you don't come into all this with your entire brain intact. You're kind of piecing all this stuff together as you're going along. But it did occur to me at that time that the Tanakh, the Old Testament, has its own list of miracles, its own list of supernatural events that would, by any rational thought, be considered unusual or difficult to believe. If we're going to call into question miracles that Jesus did as though it's kind of crazy to believe that, isn't it? Well, is it just as crazy, or isn't it just as crazy to believe that Noah built an ark? Well, even if you wanted to say, okay, well, that's not really a miracle. I mean, he built an ark and people build boats. So what about the donkey talking to Balaam? Okay, there's an example of something that is quite unusual, would be considered somewhat of a miracle. Or the parting of the Red Sea and the children of, the children of Israel leaving Egypt by way of the Red Sea, and then having the Red Sea sort of close in on Pharaoh and drowning all of Pharaoh and his army, or drowning Pharaoh and all of his army. Floating axe heads, people being cured of leprosy, people being raised from the dead, because that didn't actually start with Jesus. That those stories exist in the Hebrew Bible. So if it's crazy to believe that Jesus did all these miracles, as I have heard a few people get on that bandwagon, then I think it's just as reasonable to say, well, why do you believe in the miracles of the Tanakh? And I think that the reason comes down to, if you have moved away from belief in the authority of the New Testament, then of course the things in the New Testament you're going to be now skeptical about. And if you are using a different measure to weigh the Torah and to weigh the Tanakh, you're still going to be inclined to accept the stories of miracles that actually took place in that book, even though both, from us using the same measure, are kind of incredible to believe. Now, I'm not saying that one is right and one is wrong. I'm just saying that if we're going to use the same measures in judging these things and measuring these things, we have to say, well, if you're going to complain about one miracle, you're going to have to put them all on there, and put them all on there for the same level of criticism. In other words, I'm not going to say that Jesus did the miracles. I'm just saying that we shouldn't think it crazy that he could do the miracles. and so anyway, that's part of the story. The other part is about some of the criticism that people will level against the New Testament, the documents themselves, in so far as whether we can trust them as not being tampered, as being copied faithfully generation after generation, because we know that there are plenty of examples of differences between copies of different generations of documents that existed. And so there is a problem there. But the problem is that the same group of people that are actually critical of New Testament scholarship for those reasons are also critical of the Tanakh, and that things like Isaiah, it is believed, is written by 4 different people and not just one person. I think I'm correct on that. There are criticisms about the Hebrew Scriptures that are just that are similar to the criticisms of the New Testament. So if we're going to have a problem with the New Testament, using the same weight and measure, we have to say, if those same criticisms can be made about the Hebrew Scriptures, then we need to be honest and say that those problems or those criticisms exist in both camps. We can't point the finger at the other group and say that there's a problem with the way they're handling the Bible, and that there's nothing wrong with how we handle it, how we handle our Scriptures. Our Scriptures are, they're true, and those Scriptures are not true. So that has kind of put me in an awkward position over the last while, as I have had to kind of reprocess everything, because the one thing that I have become more and more convinced of over time is that, because I'm saying this is in the Torah. It says, don't use 2 weights when you're measuring things out. Don't use dishonest scales. And we should, no matter how we are approaching our arguments, whether they are religious, whether they are political, whether they are about ethics or social issues, we need to be willing to use the same measure, And I see this in kind of some of the political discourse that goes on. That people who were very angry at how the left was always attacking Bush when George W. Bush was the president, are now being as scathing in their dislike of Barack Obama. They criticize the left for what they are now doing. And boy, I wish I could leave it there, but I can't. I have to say that the left is now as critical of the right criticizing Barack Obama And they don't see the hypocrisy. That's the funny thing about it. They think that they were completely in their right to be critical of George W. Bush. And anyway, there's so it's some way we got to kind of work on this, I think. Just my opinion.